Pain arrived first, sharp and insistent, dragging Lieutenant Hannah back to consciousness like a fishhook through murky water. Her head throbbed, her ribs screamed, and her wrists, oh, her wrists were doing something beyond screaming, maybe interpretive dance in the key of agony. She tried to move and immediately regretted every life choice that had led to this moment. "Okay," she muttered into the darkness, her voice rough as gravel. "Okay, okay, okay." Which was, admittedly, not the most inspiring self-talk she'd ever managed. But given the circumstances, chained to a wall in what smelled like a combination of ozone, industrial cleaner, and something that might have been rotting meat, she'd give herself a pass. Her eyes adjusted slowly. Not that there was much to see. 4 walls, each one a lovely shade of, "You're probably going to die here." Low ceiling. No windows, because of course not. Just her, some really committed restraints, and the kind of silence that made you acutely aware of your own breathing. How long had she been out? Hours? Days? Her last clear memories surfaced through the fog. Her reconnaissance vessel screaming through Atmo, alarms blaring, the Kilmarth warship's tractor beam yanking her out of stealth like a parent catching a teenager sneaking out. She'd tried to dump the nav data, initiate the self-destruct on sensitive equipment. But then something had hit the cockpit, and everything went sideways. Literally, her ship had actually rolled sideways, and then nothing. Now she was here, wherever here was, a Kilmarth prison, obviously, which meant she was on one of their vessels, probably still in the Outer Rim territories, which also meant Command had no idea where she was, which furthermore meant nobody was coming to rescue her. "Fantastic," she said to the empty room. "Really, just stellar work, Hannah. Top marks." The restraints around her wrists hummed softly, some kind of adaptive technology that tightened whenever she pulled against them. Neat trick. Sadistic, but neat. Her ankles had similar cuffs, though at least she could stand if she wanted to. Not that standing seemed particularly useful at the moment. She tested the chains. Solid. Tested them again, because hope springs eternal. And also because sitting still had never been her strong suit. Still solid. Her tactical vest was gone. Her sidearm, obviously gone. Her boots, and this felt personal, also gone. Just her undershirt and cargo pants, both torn and blood-stained. She had a cut above her left eye that had crusted over, and something was definitely wrong with her ribs on the right side. Cracked, maybe. Possibly broken. Not great. Not terrible. She'd had worse. That was a lie. This was actually pretty terrible. Before she could sink too deep into the very reasonable urge to panic, a door she hadn't noticed slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Light flooded in, harsh and clinical, and Hannah squinted against it. 3 figures entered. 2 were clearly guards, massive, scaled, carrying weapons that looked designed to compensate for something, but it was the 3rd figure that commanded attention. Kilmarth, obviously. Reptilian features, with scales that shimmered between green and gold depending on the light. Tall, maybe 8 feet when standing fully upright. Eyes that were entirely too intelligent, set in a face that managed to look both ancient and ageless. He wore what passed for an officer's uniform among his people. Elaborate shoulder pieces, chest armor etched with symbols Hannah couldn't read, and an expression of supreme confidence. "The human is awake," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive Kilmarth rasp, like rocks grinding together. He spoke in Standard, which was considerate of him. How unexpected. Hannah blinked at him. "You know, I get that a lot. Really keeps me humble." One of the guards shifted, hand moving toward his weapon. The officer, commander probably, based on the fancy shoulder bits, raised a clawed hand. "Humor," he said, studying her like she was a particularly interesting specimen under glass. "Your species uses it as a defense mechanism. Fascinating." "Also, we just think we're hilarious," Hannah said. "It's kind of our whole thing." The commander moved closer, circling her slowly. Hannah tracked him with her eyes, keeping her breathing steady despite the spike of adrenaline. Predators, and the Kilmarth were absolutely predators, responded to fear. Better to project confidence, even if it was entirely manufactured. "I am Rilmoth, High Commander of this vessel," he said. "You are Lieutenant Hannah of the Terran Coalition Navy. Your ship was running reconnaissance in restricted space. This constitutes an act of espionage." "Tomato, tomato," Hannah said. Rilmoth's head tilted, confused. "It means we're arguing semantics," she clarified. "You call it restricted space. We call it unclaimed territory. Potato, potato." "Your vessel's black box will tell us everything we need to know," Rilmoth continued, ignoring her completely. "Your command codes, your patrol routes, your fleet positions." Hannah laughed. Couldn't help it. The sound echoed weirdly in the small cell. "What amuses you?" Rilmoth asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his tone. "You think I have command codes? I'm a lieutenant. I'm basically one step above person who brings the Admiral coffee. They don't tell me anything important." "And yet they sent you on a reconnaissance mission." "Because I'm expendable," Hannah said cheerfully. "That's kind of the definition of a lieutenant. We're the military equivalent of some assembly required." One of the guards made a sound that might have been a laugh. Rilmoth shot him a look that could have melted hull plating. "You will tell us what we wish to know," Rilmoth said, turning back to Hannah. "Your species is soft, fragile. You feel pain acutely. You require constant sustenance, regular rest. You are essentially domesticated creatures, playing at being soldiers." "Wow," Hannah said. "Tell me how you really feel. Don't hold back." "Your restraints are designed to cause increasing discomfort over time," Rilmoth continued, as casually as if he were discussing the weather. "Nothing that will cause permanent damage, you understand. We are not barbarians, but within a few hours you will be eager to cooperate. Within a day you will beg to cooperate." He leaned in close, his breath hot and smelling faintly of sulfur. "Your kind should never have left your little planet," he said softly. "You are prey pretending to be predators, and here, in the dark, reality reasserts itself." Hannah met his gaze steadily. "You know what? I'm starting to think you don't like humans very much. Just a vibe I'm getting." Rilmoth straightened, smoothing the front of his uniform. "You have until tomorrow to reconsider your attitude. I suggest you spend that time wisely." "Tomorrow?" Hannah asked. "Is that Kilmarth tomorrow or human tomorrow? Because your day cycle is like 36 hours, and that seems excessive." But Rilmoth was already leaving, the guards following. The door slid shut behind them with a finality that Hannah felt in her bones. Darkness returned, silence returned, and Hannah, alone in the dark, let out a long, shaky breath. "Okay," she said again. "Okay." She tested the restraints once more. Still solid. Still humming with that adaptive technology. Still very much keeping her exactly where the Kilmarth wanted her. Her ribs hurt. Her head hurt. Everything hurt, actually, now that the adrenaline was fading. But she wasn't dead. That was something. And she wasn't broken. That was more. Hannah had been in bad situations before. Not quite this bad. This was definitely in the top 5, maybe top 3, but bad enough. You didn't make it to lieutenant without developing a certain amount of creative problem-solving skills. Usually those skills involved explosives and questionable decisions. But still, she needed to think, assess, plan. The restraints were adaptive, which meant they responded to input. Pull too hard, they tighten. But maybe if she... A sound interrupted her thoughts. Faint. Distant. Like scratching? Hannah froze, listening. There it was, again. Definitely scratching. Or scraping. Metal on metal, maybe. Great, she muttered. Either this ship has rats the size of shuttles, or I'm already hallucinating. Neither option is encouraging. She tilted her head, trying to pinpoint the source. Behind her, somewhere in the wall, low, near the floor. The sound continued. Patient, persistent, methodical. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time had lost all meaning in the darkness. The scratching grew louder. Hannah's pulse quickened. Was something actually tunneling toward her cell? That seemed unlikely. Impossible, even. The Kilmarth built their ships with redundant hull plating, internal bulkheads, structural reinforcements. A piece of the wall panel popped loose with a metallic clatter. Hannah stared at the small hole that had appeared about 2 feet off the ground. Roughly circular, maybe 8 inches in diameter. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then something moved in the darkness of that hole. Something that reflected the faint emergency lighting with an iridescent sheen. Something that was definitely, absolutely, unmistakably alive. And Hannah, despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the very real possibility that she was about to die, felt her face split into a grin. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh, you absolute idiots. You wonderful, terrible idiots." Because she knew exactly what was about to come through that hole. And Rilmoth, for all his threats and superiority, had absolutely no idea what was coming for him. A nose emerged first, black, wet, about the size of Hannah's fist. Then whiskers, long and twitching. Then a face that could only be described as aggressively adorable in the way that baby apex predators always were. Which was to say, adorable, right up until you remembered what they'd grow into. The first cub squeezed through the hole with surprising grace, landing on the cell floor with barely a sound. Midnight blue fur covered its body, shot through with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed softly in shades of violet and silver. Those patterns ran along its spine, down its legs, across its face in swirls that seemed almost decorative. Almost! The cub shook itself, ears flicking, and looked directly at Hannah. Then it chirped. Not a roar, not a growl. A chirp, high-pitched and questioning, like a gigantic murder kitten asking if she was okay. "Hey, little one," Hannah whispered, and her voice cracked embarrassingly. "Hey, yeah, it's me." The second cub came through, slightly smaller than the first, with patterns that glowed more blue than violet. This one immediately started sniffing around the cell, investigating everything with the intense focus of a toddler in a new environment. The third cub took longer. Bigger than its siblings, it had to really wiggle to fit through the opening. When it finally tumbled out, it went straight for Hannah, bounding across the floor and slamming into her legs with enough force to make her wince. "Oof! Okay! Yes! Hello! I missed you too! Ow, ribs! Remember the ribs!" But the cub was having none of it. It reared up on its hind legs, front paws on her chest, and started making a sound somewhere between a purr and a whine. The other two joined immediately, pressing against her sides, nuzzling her hands, their bioluminescent patterns flashing in what Hannah had learned was their version of emotional distress. Licknar cubs, 3 of them. Her 3 cubs, specifically. And oh, what a story that was. 2 months ago. Had it only been 2 months? Hannah had been running a supply delivery to a remote trading post in the Threshold sector. Routine mission. Boring, even. Until she'd picked up a distress beacon from a derelict station orbiting a dead moon. Standard. Protocol said, ignore it. Derelict stations were bad news 99 times out of 100. Pirates, scavengers, or worse. But Hannah had never been great at following standard protocol. She'd docked, investigated, found the station completely abandoned, life support failing, interior ransacked, and in a cargo bay, huddled in a corner, 3 tiny Licknar cubs trying very hard to look threatening while clearly terrified out of their minds. Licknar, the galaxy's apex predator, the species that made Silmarth look like house pets. The boogeyman every civilization told stories about. Adult Licknar could tear through starship hulls with their claws, moved faster than most tracking systems could follow, and had never, not once in recorded history, been successfully kept in captivity. These 3 had been maybe a month old. Eyes barely open. Abandoned. Probably by poachers who'd killed the parents, and then realized baby Licknar were absolutely worthless on the black market, because nobody was stupid enough to try raising them. Nobody except Hannah, apparently. She'd smuggled them aboard her ship, fed them protein paste that they devoured like it was gourmet cuisine, set up a nest in the cargo bay with thermal blankets, planned to find them a sanctuary, or contact the Licknar Collective, or figure out literally any solution that wasn't raise 3 baby apex predators in a military vessel. But the cubs had imprinted. Fast. Licknar cubs imprinted on the first consistent food source they encountered, and Hannah had become, for all intents and purposes, their mother, which had been adorable when they were the size of house cats. Now they were the size of large dogs. And growing. She'd hidden them before the reconnaissance mission. Locked down the cargo bay, left them supplies, promised she'd be back in a few days. It was supposed to be simple. Get in, scan the sector, get out. Instead, she'd gotten caught, crashed, captured. And apparently, the cubs had decided that was unacceptable. How did you even? Hannah started, then stopped, because one of the cubs was already working on her restraints. It had produced something that looked like a multi-tool, gripped awkwardly in its jaws, and was attempting to manipulate the release mechanism. Where had it gotten a multi-tool? Where had any of them gotten the equipment to tunnel through a Kilmarth warship? The cub fumbled the tool, dropped it, picked it up again with a frustrated snort. Here, Hannah said gently. Let me. No, you've got it. That's good. Yes, that panel. Just like that. The largest cub positioned itself near the cell door, ears swiveling, listening, alert, on guard. Its patterns had shifted to a deeper purple, which Hannah had learned meant heightened awareness, threat detection mode. The 3rd cub stayed pressed against her leg, occasionally licking her knee with a tongue that felt like sandpaper made of sandpaper. You tracked me, Hannah murmured, realization dawning. Across space, through hyperspace jumps. You tracked my scent signature somehow and followed me here. The cub with the multi-tool chirped affirmatively, still working on the restraints. Licknar had some of the most advanced olfactory systems in known space. They could track prey across star systems if they got a good scent lock. But these were cubs. Babies. They shouldn't have been capable of that level of sophisticated hunting behavior yet. Unless desperation had accelerated their development. Unless the bond they'd formed with her was stronger than standard Licknar pack dynamics. Hannah's throat tightened. You absolute idiots, she said softly. You brilliant, wonderful idiots. You could have gotten yourselves killed. The restraint on her left wrist suddenly hissed and released. The cub made a triumphant sound, tail swishing. Yes! Good job! Now the other one! But the cub was already moving to her right wrist, working with surprising dexterity for something with paws instead of hands. Hannah glanced at the door. How long before the Kilmarth checked on her? How long before they realized something was wrong? The ship had to have internal sensors, monitoring systems, unless the cubs had already worked around those, which, given that they'd successfully tunneled through what should have been impenetrable hull plating without triggering alarms, seemed entirely possible. "Okay," Hannah said, thinking out loud. "Okay, you got in. Now we need to get out. All of us. Which means—" The second restraint released. Hannah's arms dropped, and she bit back a groan as circulation returned to her hands. Pins and needles sensation, sharp and unpleasant, but she forced herself to move, flexing her fingers. The cub moved to her ankle restraints, working with practiced efficiency now. "Which means," Hannah continued, "we need to get to a ship. My ship is probably impounded under guard, so we need to steal something. A shuttle, maybe. But that requires access codes, biometric authorization." Both ankle restraints released simultaneously. Hannah stood, wobbled, caught herself against the wall. Her ribs protested violently. Her head swam. The largest cub was immediately there, pressing against her side, supporting her weight. The other two flanked her, one on each side. "Thanks," she breathed. Okay, I'm good. I'm fine. We need to move." She looked at the hole they'd created, barely 8 inches across. She was not 8 inches wide. "How did you even—" "The maintenance shafts." The cubs looked at her expectantly. "Right. Obviously the maintenance shafts, because this ship is probably riddled with them, and you're small enough to fit, and you can navigate in the dark, and—" She paused. "Wait. If you came through the shafts, I need to go through the shafts." The largest cub nudged her toward the hole. "I'm going to need you to understand that I am significantly larger than you," Hannah said, "and also human-shaped, which is not optimal for crawling through tight spaces, and also currently operating on a scale of 1 to 10, where my everything is approximately 15. The cub nudged her again, more insistently. "Fine. Okay. Worst plan ever, but it's the only plan we've got." Hannah crouched, wincing at the pain in her ribs. The hole looked even smaller up close. The edges were rough, clearly torn rather than cut. Claw marks everywhere. She reached through, felt around. The space beyond was cramped, but navigable. Maybe. "If I get stuck," she told the cubs, "you have permission to laugh at me, after you figure out how to pull me free." Then she started squeezing through, and every single injury she'd sustained decided to announce itself simultaneously. This was, objectively, a terrible idea. But the cubs were already scrambling through after her, their bioluminescent patterns providing the only light in the darkness of the shaft. And Hannah, wedged in a maintenance tunnel on an enemy warship with 3 baby apex predators as her rescue party, couldn't help but laugh. Because really, when you thought about it, this was exactly the kind of nonsense her life had become. The maintenance shaft was designed for automated repair drones, which meant it was about 2 feet wide and filled with things that wanted to poke, scrape, or electrocute anything stupid enough to crawl through it. Hannah qualified as stupid enough. She army crawled through the darkness, every movement sending fresh waves of pain through her ribs. The cubs moved around her with unsettling ease, their bioluminescent patterns casting everything in shades of violet and blue. Occasionally one would pause, sniff the air, adjust course, and the others would follow. They knew where they were going. Somehow. Left or right? Hannah whispered at an intersection. The smallest cub chittered and went left. The others followed. Left it is, then. You're the expert. The shaft sloped downward, and Hannah had to brace herself to avoid sliding. Her palms were already raw from scraping against the metal. Her ribs were informing her, in no uncertain terms, that this whole escapade was a phenomenally bad idea. She ignored them. Her ribs had terrible judgment. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 20 minutes, the shaft widened slightly. Hannah could almost sit upright if she hunched. Progress. The largest cub stopped suddenly, going rigid. Its patterns shifted to deep purple. Threat warning. Hannah froze. Voices, muffled, but close. Speaking Kilmarth, which Hannah understood enough of to catch phrases like perimeter check and security sweep. The cub backed up slowly, pressing against Hannah. The other two went absolutely still, their patterns dimming until they were barely visible. Natural camouflage, their bodies adapting to the environment instinctively. Hannah held her breath. Below them, she could hear it more clearly now, footsteps. Heavy. Multiple individuals. Patrol, probably. Standard security rotation. Nothing on sensors. One voice said. Still don't understand why we're holding a human, another replied. Waste of resources. Commander's orders. He wants information about their fleet positions. A snort. She'll break. They always do. Soft species. The footsteps continued past, fading into the distance. Hannah waited until silence returned, then let out her breath slowly. Soft species, she muttered. I'm literally crawling through your walls, like a demented rodent. How is that soft? The cubs relaxed, their patterns brightening again. The largest one licked her face. Its version of reassurance, probably, though the sandpaper tongue didn't feel particularly reassuring. They continued through the shafts, left, then right, then down through a vertical section that Hannah negotiated with significantly less grace than the cubs. At one point, she actually got wedged, stuck between two support beams, and had to wiggle herself free while the cubs watched with what she could only interpret as judgment. Not a word, she told them. Not one word. They chirped innocently. Finally, the shaft opened into a larger space. Some kind of junction point, where multiple maintenance tunnels converged. Hannah could stand, which felt like a luxury after crawling for what seemed like forever. She stretched carefully, assessing the damage. Everything hurt, but nothing seemed worse than before. Minor miracle. The cubs were already investigating the junction, sniffing at various tunnel openings. The smallest one made a triumphant sound and started down a tunnel that angled upward. That way? Hannah asked. 3 sets of luminescent eyes looked at her expectantly. All right, lead on. This tunnel was wider, clearly designed for actual maintenance personnel rather than drones. Hannah could walk in a crouch, which was infinitely better than crawling. The cubs ranged ahead, moving with increasing confidence. The tunnel ended at a grate. Through the slats, Hannah could see a corridor, actual interior ship space, not maintenance areas. Clean, well-lit, empty. She tested the grate. Locked, but not seriously. Basic mechanical fasteners. The kind of thing designed to keep people out of maintenance areas, not keep prisoners in. Anyone got a multi-tool? She whispered. The middle cub produced one from somewhere. Hannah decided not to ask where somewhere was. Maybe they had pockets in their fur. Maybe they'd just been carrying tools in their mouths this whole time. Either way, she wasn't going to question it. She worked on the fasteners, fingers clumsy from the cold and the pain. The first one came loose, then the second. The grate swung open with a faint squeak that sounded deafening in the quiet corridor. Hannah poked her head out. Coast clear. She climbed through, helping the cubs after her even though they clearly didn't need help. Real gravity felt strange after crawling through the shafts. Her legs wobbled slightly. "Okay," she said, orienting herself. Standard Kilmarth vessel. Layout. Maintenance areas on the lower decks. Living quarters mid-ship. Command and hangar bays upper decks. If they could reach the hangar... A door opened down the corridor. Hannah's heart stopped. She grabbed the nearest cub, dove back toward the grate, but there wasn't time. A Kilmarth crew member stepped out, looking down at a datapad, not paying attention. Hannah pressed herself against the wall, pulling the cubs close. They went statue still, patterns dimming to almost nothing. The crew member looked up, looked directly at them. Time stretched. Hannah's hand drifted toward a pipe on the wall. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. The Kilmarth's eyes widened. His mouth opened. The largest cub sneezed. Not a cute sneeze. A full-body, explosive sneeze that echoed in the corridor. The crew member squeaked, actually squeaked, and bolted back through the door he'd come from. It slid shut behind him with a pneumatic hiss. Hannah stared at the closed door. Did he just run away? The cubs looked pleased with themselves. From you sneezing? The largest cub sneezed again, apparently for emphasis. Okay. New information. Kilmarth are apparently terrified of Licknar. Even baby ones. Good to know. Alarms didn't blare, which meant the crew member either hadn't reported what he'd seen or hadn't been believed. Either way, they had a window. Hannah moved quickly down the corridor, the cubs keeping pace. She needed to orient herself, figure out where the hangar was. A viewing port provided answers. Through the transparent aluminum, she could see the curve of the ship's hull, and beyond it, the distinctive ring structure of an upper-deck hangar bay. There, she breathed. That's where we need to be. Getting there would be the trick. She found a ship directory panel on the wall, activated it. Kilmarth script scrolled across the display. Hannah's translation skills were rusty, but she could make out the basics. Hangar bay 3 sections forward, 2 decks up. Also, conveniently, there was a notation about a human vessel currently under examination in hangar containment. Her ship. Right there. Okay, here's the problem, Hannah said to the cubs, who listened with apparent attention. My ship is there, but it'll be guarded, heavily. And even if we could get to it, it's probably in a containment field. We'd need command authorization to release it. The cubs tilted their heads in unison. But there are also shuttles in the hangar. Kilmarth crew shuttles. Problem is, they require biometric authorization. Retinal scan, probably, plus maybe DNA verification, which I don't have, being human and all. The smallest cub made an inquisitive chirp. No, we cannot just steal an officer's eyeball. That's okay. That's actually a really Licknar solution. But no, we're going with something slightly less eyeball-y. She studied the directory again. Hangar access routes. There had to be multiple ways in. Cargo loading, personnel entry, maintenance access. Maintenance access, obviously. Back into the walls, she said. I know, but unless you've got a better idea. The largest cub was already prying open another maintenance grate. That's what I thought. They crawled. Again. Because apparently, this was just Hannah's life now. Crawling through the guts of an enemy warship with 3 baby predators who were somehow more competent at stealth operations than most of the soldiers she'd trained with. The shaft led upward, winding through the ship's infrastructure. Hannah could hear the ambient sounds of the vessel. Air recyclers, power conduits, distant footsteps. Life happening around them while they moved through the hidden spaces between. The shaft terminated at another grate, this one looking down into the hangar bay itself. Hannah peered through. Her heart sank. The hangar was massive, easily 400 feet across, with multiple shuttles and small craft docked along the walls. Her ship sat in the center, surrounded by a shimmering containment field, and no fewer than 8 guards. Standing near her vessel, examining a datapad, was Rilmoth himself. "Oh, come on," Hannah muttered. "What are the odds?" Pretty good odds, actually. The Kilmarth commander would absolutely want to personally supervise the examination of captured human technology. There were other shuttles, though. Smaller craft, crew transports. One sat relatively isolated near the far wall, maybe 60 feet from their current position. If they could reach it, if they could somehow get biometric authorization. Wait. Hannah's eyes tracked the hangar. Guards at regular intervals, patrols moving in predictable patterns. And near the isolated shuttle, a single Kilmarth officer doing what appeared to be routine maintenance checks. One officer, alone, near a shuttle. "Okay," Hannah said slowly. "Okay, this is possibly the worst idea I've ever had. And I once tried to make a plasma torch out of a coffee maker, so that's saying something." The Cubs looked at her expectantly. "We need that officer to authorize the shuttle, which means we need to persuade him, non-lethally, without alerting the other guards, and then somehow get aboard and launch before anyone realizes what's happening." The largest Cub's pattern shifted, brightening with what Hannah had learned to recognize as excitement. "No," she said firmly. "No pouncing. No tackling. No—" The Cub was already moving, squeezing through the grate before she could stop it. "Playing," Hannah finished weakly. "That was going to be my third no. No playing." But the Cub was committed now, dropping from the grate with disturbing silence, landing in the shadows beneath a cargo hauler. The other 2 Cubs looked at Hannah. "Your sibling is going to get us all killed," she told them. Then she followed through the grate, because leaving one Cub alone in an enemy hangar bay seemed worse than whatever chaos was about to unfold. Her feet hit the deck with more noise than she'd have liked. She rolled, came up behind a fuel container, assessing. The largest Cub was already stalking toward the isolated officer, moving low and silent. The other 2 Cubs dropped down beside Hannah, patterns pulsing with anticipation. And Hannah, watching her makeshift rescue squad prepare to assault a Kilmarth officer in the middle of an active hangar bay, had a moment of absolute clarity. This was definitely going to go badly. But at this point, badly was all she had. Hannah had approximately 3 seconds to formulate a plan before everything went completely sideways. She used those 3 seconds to think, don't let the Cubs kill anyone, get to the shuttle, steal the shuttle, escape the shuttle, figure out the rest later. Not her best plan, not even in her top 10. But it would have to do. The largest Cub crept closer to the isolated officer, who was thoroughly absorbed in his datapad, running diagnostics on the shuttle's power systems. Completely oblivious. Hannah could practically see the Cub's muscles bunching, preparing to pounce. "Wait!" she hissed. The Cub paused, looked back at her. Hannah made a complicated series of hand gestures that she hoped conveyed gentle, no claws, just scare him a little. The Cub's patterns brightened. Whether that meant understanding or excitement, Hannah had no idea. Then it leaped. To be fair, the Cub tried to be gentle. Really, it did. The pounce was practically restrained by Licknar standards. No claws extended, no teeth showing, just a playful tackle that would have been adorable if it wasn't happening to a fully armed enemy officer. The Kilmarth went down with a strangled yelp, datapad clattering across the deck. The cub landed on his chest, tail swishing, making a sound somewhere between a purr and a growl. The officer stared up at the glowing predator, pinning him to the ground. His eyes went very, very wide. "Don't scream," Hannah said, emerging from behind the fuel container with her hands raised. "Seriously, please don't scream. That would be bad for everyone." The officer's mouth opened. One of the other cubs bounded over, chirping happily, and licked his face with enthusiasm. The officer made a noise like a deflating balloon. "Good," Hannah said. "That's good. No screaming, just cooperation. Nice, calm cooperation." She moved quickly, keeping low, acutely aware that they were completely exposed if anyone looked in this direction. The officer was still pinned, still staring at the cubs like they were his worst nightmare made manifest, which, to be fair, they probably were. "Here's how this works," Hannah said, crouching beside him. "You're going to authorize that shuttle. Retinal scan, DNA verification, whatever it needs. Then you're going to stay very quiet while we leave. In return, these three," she gestured at the cubs, "don't eat you. Sound fair?" The officer nodded frantically. "Great. Fantastic. Love the enthusiasm." She hauled him to his feet. Well, tried to. He was 8 feet tall, and she was running on pain and spite, so it was more like she gestured at him to stand, and he complied. The largest cub stayed close, pressed against his leg, patterns pulsing in what Hannah really hoped was meant to be friendly. They moved toward the shuttle, slowly, carefully. The officer stumbling slightly because having a baby apex predator as an escort tended to affect one's coordination. Hannah's eyes tracked the hangar. The other guards were focused on her vessel, on Rilmoth, on their patrol routes. Nobody was looking this direction. Not yet. The shuttle's access panel glowed softly. Biometric scanner, DNA verification pad, retinal scanner, the full suite of security measures. "Do it," Hannah said quietly. The officer leaned toward the retinal scanner, hand trembling as he placed it on the DNA pad. The panel beeped. Green light. The shuttle's hatch hissed open. Hannah grabbed the officer's arm. "Inside! Now!" "What? But you said—" "I said they wouldn't eat you. I didn't say you could stay out here and raise the alarm the second we're gone. Inside!" They hustled into the shuttle, the cubs bounding in after them with clear delight. The interior was cramped, designed for maybe 6 Kilmarth at most. With 3 cubs bouncing around, it felt like a circus. "Sit," Hannah ordered the officer, pointing at one of the rear seats. "Buckle in. Don't touch anything." He sat. The smallest cub immediately climbed into his lap, purring. The officer looked like he was reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. Hannah slid into the pilot's seat, scanning the controls. Kilmarth design, which meant everything was slightly too large and positioned for someone with longer arms. But the basics were universal: power, navigation, propulsion, communications. She powered up the engines. In the hangar, heads turned. "Oh no," Hannah muttered. A guard shouted something. Another reached for his comm unit. Hannah's hands flew across the controls, overriding safety protocols, canceling the docking clamps. The shuttle shuddered. More shouting. Guards running toward them now. Rilmoth looked up from his datapad, saw the shuttle powering up, saw Hannah through the viewport. His expression went from confusion to fury in about half a second. "Absolutely not," Hannah said, more to herself than anyone else. "Absolutely not letting you catch me twice in one day. That would just be embarrassing." She slammed the throttle forward. The shuttle lurched, still partially mag-locked to the deck. Warning lights flashed across every console. The guards were 20 feet away. 15. 10. The mag locks released. The shuttle shot forward like a cork from a bottle, veering wildly as Hannah fought with the controls. She clipped a cargo container. Sparks flew, overcorrected, and nearly rammed into a parked fighter. "This is fine," she yelled over the engine noise and the increasingly frantic alarm systems. "Everything is fine." The key, Cubs, naturally, thought this was the best game ever. They bounced from seat to seat, patterns flashing excitedly, making sounds of pure joy. The Chilmarth officer had his eyes closed and appeared to be praying. Hannah aimed for the hangar's atmospheric barrier, that shimmering field that kept air in but let ships through. The shuttle accelerated, engines screaming. Guards scattered. Someone fired a weapon. The shot went wide, hitting the deck plating. Rilmoth was shouting orders, but Hannah couldn't hear them over the chaos. The shuttle hit the barrier and punched through into open space. Silence. Sudden and absolute. Just the hum of the engines and the sound of Hannah's own breathing. Stars surrounded them. The Chilmarth warship loomed behind, already beginning to turn, tracking systems locking on. "Okay," Hannah said, checking the navigation console. "Okay, we're not dead yet. That's something." The smallest cub chirped happily from the officer's lap. Hannah plotted a jump vector, fingers shaking slightly from adrenaline. The warship was moving to intercept, launching pursuit craft. She had maybe 90 seconds before they were in weapons range. She needed coordinates, somewhere safe, somewhere the Chilmarth couldn't follow. The console beeped. Incoming transmission. Coded frequency. Not military standard. Hannah frowned, opened it. A voice crackled through. "Unidentified shuttle. This is the Licknar vessel Night's Whisper. We've been tracking 3 juveniles to your location. Confirm you have them aboard." Hannah's brain stuttered. What? You've been—" "The Cubs," the voice said, patient but firm. "Do you have them?" Hannah looked at the 3 Cubs, who were now wrestling with each other in the aisle, completely unbothered by the fact that they were fleeing an enemy warship. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, I've got them. Stand by for extraction. We're transmitting jump coordinates to your navigation system." The console lit up. New coordinates, already plotted, already loaded. "Who is this?" Hannah asked. "I am Nirsha, pack leader. The Cubs' mother was my sister. We've been searching for them since the attack on the station. We tracked their scent signatures here, but your vessel—" A pause, something that might have been amusement, was difficult to approach unnoticed. Until now. Behind them, the Chilmarth warship fired. The shot went wide, but not by much. "Jump now," Nirsha said. "We'll meet you on the other side." Hannah didn't hesitate. She engaged the jump drive. Reality twisted, compressed, and then they were somewhere else, a different sector entirely, surrounded by empty space and distant stars, and directly ahead, a Licknar vessel. Sleek, organic-looking, absolutely massive. It dwarfed the shuttle by orders of magnitude. Hannah had never seen one up close. Nobody had, really. The Licknar kept to themselves, avoided contact with other species. Seeing one now felt surreal. A docking bay opened in the larger ship's hull, clearly meant for the shuttle. "Bring them home," Nirsha said softly. "And you as well, Hannah of the Terran Coalition. We owe you a debt." "How do you know my name?" "The Cubs speak of you. In their way. You protected them, fed them, became their pack when they had none." Hannah guided the shuttle into the docking bay, still processing. The Cubs had settled down, sensing they were near their own kind. Even the officer had relaxed slightly, though he still looked like he was contemplating his mortality. The shuttle touched down. The engines powered off. Hannah sat for a moment, just breathing. Her ribs hurt. Her head hurt. Everything hurt. But she was alive. The cubs were safe. And somehow, impossibly, she'd just escaped a Chilmarth prison ship with the galaxy's most dangerous predators as her rescue squad. The hatch opened. Licknar adults waited outside, massive, powerful, graceful. The cubs tumbled out, chirping excitedly, immediately swarmed by what had to be family members. Hannah climbed out more slowly. Nirsha approached. Female, Hannah guessed, with patterns that swirled in gold and deep blue. "You have our gratitude," Nirsha said. "The cubs would have died without your intervention. You gave them family when they had none." "I just fed them," Hannah said. "They did the rest." "You did more than feed them. You taught them that not all aliens are threats, that some can be trusted." Nirsha's head tilted. "This changes things. Between our peoples." Hannah blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" "The Licknar have avoided contact with other species for generations. We saw only danger in connection. But you, one human, acting alone, protected our young when you had every reason not to. When it benefited you, nothing. When it risked everything." "I mean, they're adorable," Hannah said weakly. "They're apex predators." "Adorable apex predators." Nirsha made a sound that might have been laughter. "The collective wishes to meet you, to discuss possibilities, alliance, trade, understanding." "I'm just a lieutenant," Hannah said. "I don't have authority to—" "Then we will speak to those who do, because of what you've done, what you represent." Hannah looked at the cubs, now playing with what had to be siblings or cousins, completely at ease. Happy. "I should probably get back," she said. "My commanding officer is going to have questions about where I've been. And the missing shuttle. And the Chilmarth officer—" She glanced back at the shuttle, where the officer was being helped out by Licknar crew members who were being surprisingly gentle. "Who I technically kidnapped." "We'll return him unharmed," Nirsha assured her, "and we'll provide you transport to your nearest station, along with a message for your superiors." "What kind of message?" "That humanity has gained an ally today, whether they know it or not." Hannah smiled despite herself. "They're going to hate this report." "Good reports are rarely interesting." Hannah couldn't argue with that. She was escorted to quarters, given medical attention, fed food that was actually edible. The cubs visited, bringing her things they'd found: a shiny bolt, a piece of fabric, what looked like someone's datapad. Treasures, apparently. Eventually, after rest and recovery, a Licknar transport took her to the nearest coalition station. The journey included a diplomatic packet, sealed, marked for direct delivery to Coalition Command. Hannah arrived bruised, exhausted, and accompanied by 3 cubs who absolutely refused to stay behind. The station commander took one look at her, at the cubs, at the Licknar transport vessel, and said, "I'm going to need you to start from the beginning." "Sure," Hannah said, "but you're going to want to sit down for this one." She was supposed to gather intelligence, do reconnaissance, return with tactical data. Instead, she came back with 3 growing predators, a diplomatic incident, and the start of an alliance nobody saw coming. Not bad for whatever day it was. Not bad at all.